Hello, and welcome to the Creepypasta Read and Review, a show where I mock and belittle stuff written by children. I have no life. To find today's story, I made the trek across the great white wilderness that is the World Wide Web to that cesspit known as the Creepypasta Wiki. I clicked the random pasta button to play a game similar to Russian roulette. I say similar to because losing in Russian roulette merely means you get the sweet release of death, which would be preferable to reading some of these creepypastas. So, I present you with our story of the day, The Scraping. So, two things off the bat with that title. I first read that as scrapping and figured it would be about a man raised on the mean streets of post-apocalyptic Toronto, delving deep into the defunct and decaying maple syrup mines to find junk metal to power his mechanical moose. Sadly, I was wrong. And the second thing is this. Why is it that these horror stories always have to have like a one-word name, one very mundane word? The Omen, The Crow, The Exorcist, The Lasagna, The Turtle, The Hardwood Flooring. It's just unimaginative. 3 weeks ago, my wife Jen woke me up in the middle of the night and told me our 6-year-old daughter Alice wouldn't stop crying and screaming. Narrator McFirst person, our 6-year-old daughter Alice is crying. I have ears and I know my daughter's name. No, you don't. You're like Dory. I don't have short-term memory loss. I know myself. No, because you're a fish. Thank you for that info dump right there at the beginning. Hearing the said extremely violent racket, it was a tennis racket, crashing away downstairs, I asked Jen if she knew why. She said Alice complained that she felt a severe pain in her head. Apparently the pain was so bad she chucked things around the house and broke a window. And the main character heard none of this? Did the jackass down a bottle of NyQuil? Did I miss something that said the protagonist is Lily Bart? Zing, that's a reference no one will get. Hurrying downstairs immediately after I'd slipped on my dressing gown, I fell down the stairs and it really fucking hurt. I saw that our living room had been transformed into a skip full of broken ornaments, most prominently a smashed TV. Small fragments of broken glass covered everything. The room looked as if it had been ransacked by a gang of burglars with mallets. Definitely not as if a 6-year-old girl had been having a tantrum. And this jackass seriously heard none of this? How do you not hear your whole room being smashed up? I assume you live in Britain, since this is using British slang, so you have a small house, so there's no way that you're not hearing this. Definitely not as if a 6-year-old girl had been having a tantrum. But the condition of my house was a minuscule worry compared to Alice, who I saw bunched up in one corner of the room, clutching her head furiously. My daughter had seemed to run out of energy after her episode, and lay quivering on the floor like a jelly, but I could tell that the pain had not yet departed. So I scooped her up and added her to my peanut butter sandwich. She was delicious. I picked Alice up and asked her how bad her head felt. Drops of tears and snot fell like rain onto the ribbed lapel of my dressing gown. Her face ashen, she wheezed, "Daddy, someone's scraping my brain from my bone." I wasn't going to mention this at first, since it could very well have been two women married. But what guy wears a dressing gown? I feel it's become a little outdated, which, come to think of it, explains a lot. This guy heard nothing because he's... I heard nothing because he's living in a silent film. I've cracked the case. We can go home. My whole body went stiff, and I called an ambulance right away. Okay, so let's guess right now what this girl has. Smashed up the house, splitting headache. Those are our symptoms. I'm betting it's going to be a ghost or a demon. That's what I'm betting right now. Now, the author neither gains nor loses points if that's the case. They gain points if it turns out to be an alien egg in her skull, or extra-dimensional creatures mining bone from her. They lose points if it's somehow a mundane human serial killer. And they win if the girl is afflicted with a very real, if exaggerated, insect that lays its eggs in living creatures. The paramedics arrived around 5 minutes later, and had they not seen the shattered glass spilling from the window frame into the front yard, they would never have believed my story. Alice was looking perfectly normal, apart from a few cuts on her hands, no longer clutching her temple. Her usual obedient, quiet mannerisms resumed. She said the pain had pained it bored in a few minutes, and that she was as perfectly fine as a daisy and just wanted to go back to bed. Undoubtedly, everyone was still concerned, mostly me, still as pale as Swiss cheese. "Daddy, someone's scraping my brain from my bone." In case you forgot. Maybe the author just thinks everyone is as forgetful as he is. Jen, I, and the paramedics all apprehensively insisted she was taken quickly to the hospital and given a checkup. You insisted she was taken? Because that makes it seem like you think that was what happened and something else entirely occurred. Is this another symptom of your short-term memory loss, Dory? And at least get her wounds dressed. She allowed herself to be escorted there, tired but showing no further signs of pain or anxiety. Alice's transition from the hellish blazing fire into the simply mild disposition was so startlingly rapid that it, in itself, was disquieting. "Daddy, someone's scraping my brain from my bone, in case you forgot." That wasn't what the story said. I just added that in there. We returned home a few hours later as the doctor said she was indeed as perfectly fine as a daisy. That was actually the professional medical diagnosis. Well, except for the one guy who said that she was as fine as a chrysanthemum. A head scan revealed no injuries, and the pain was probably due to getting up too quickly from a horizontal position. Bull fucking shit. I know this is low-hanging fruit, but these creepypasta doctors are morons. "Well, you see from the scan of Alice's head that she—" Doctor, that's a head of cabbage." "Oh, well, they're biologically very similar." She slept in our room for 3 nights after the incident, and that seems to be the end of it. I returned home from work one day to the sweet, mouth-watering smell of KFC sitting on the table, which Jen had cooked up. I was surprised Alice wasn't downstairs yet. It was her favorite meal. And on days when we had roast chicken, she would always be the first one in the dining room. Assuming Alice was downstairs playing with her dolls or her new crafts kit, I called her and her brother Josh downstairs for dinner. Also, Josh is here, but no one likes him. Josh was down a minute later, but Alice seemed to be taking longer. I called her repeatedly, turning the volume up a notch each time, but she would neither reply nor come downstairs. Going up to her room myself, I opened the door to see her pulling a miniature denim skirt onto her doll. "Alice, darling, it's dinner time. Quick, go downstairs now." "Alice, come downstairs." She blatantly shunned me. Stepping into the room, I yelled at her and asked why she was ignoring my calls. "Why are you shouting?" she asked, looking at me felinely, like a startled cat. Yes, that's what felinely means, if that even is a word. Surprised, I answered, similarly to someone responding to a question. "Because you're not coming downstairs to eat." "You never called me." "I called you lots of times, loudly as well. Josh heard me, and his room is further from the staircase than yours, and I thought you liked chicken. Didn't you smell the nice aroma?" "Daddy, why do you always talk like you're in a fantasy novel? And why does your accent change?" That's not what she said. "No, I didn't hear you either. You could have said it louder. Plus, Josh didn't tell me." Okay, I've spent time around 6-year-olds, and anyone who's been around them can corroborate this with me. This isn't abnormal. Kids won't listen, and when they're playing, they're off in their own little world. So this isn't anything that's really cause for alarm so far. In an annoyed manner, she brushed past me and went downstairs. I can't tell if that's the right past. I think that's incorrect. As in, she brushed into the past and then me and went downstairs. She should have at least heard Josh's footsteps. I could have sworn I bellowed, "Dinner time," in my loudest voice possible. He was a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Or, within the canon of the story, this guy slept through his house being demolished, but is absolutely floored that his daughter doesn't come when he calls him. She'd had an argument with her mother? Or a bad day at school, maybe? She was obviously irritating me on purpose. Attention-seeking? Over the next few days, Jen told me that Alice was finding school more of a struggle than before. She had to be moved closer to the whiteboard as she couldn't read the writing from where she used to sit, and sometimes complained of blurred vision. Her appetite decreased dramatically. She stopped eating foods that usually had to be hidden away from her for safekeeping to make sure she didn't overindulge, such as candy and custard cream donuts, most significantly, roast chicken. Jen suggested she was just tired because she also skipped swimming and dance, activities she used to enjoy. Children don't skip activities like this. Their parents keep them from going because they were misbehaving, or they're sick, which could have happened here. Then just last week I came home from work. I noticed Alice wasn't downstairs. I decided to try calling her name, wondering whether she would decide to ignore me once more. This time she came down after a minute. I asked her why she decided to ignore me the last time I called her. "Did you?" she asked. Maybe she's just hard of hearing, or some other disability that is only now manifesting. It turned out she actually hadn't heard me this time either. With two mischievous kids to deal with all the time, I had become a pro when it came to spotting a fib. I could also spot a liar with ease, a valuable trait I'd picked up from all my hours of playing L.A. Noire. But it seemed too real for that. Perhaps she was really going deaf, or we were all living in another universe. Maybe she's going deaf. Maybe she's going blind. Maybe she's out of her mind. But at least the narrator acknowledges that she might be going deaf. It was Josh who had prompted Alice to go downstairs after hearing me call her. Furthermore, he said that even though he was in her room, she kept on telling him to get closer because she couldn't hear what he was saying. After concerning discussion with Jen, who had also been noticing similar problems, we both decided we would take Alice for a sight and hearing checkup in the morning. Finally, a wise and non-irrational decision in the story. Maybe our daughter's having hearing problems coupled with manic depressive mood swings. Let's see how this goes. Now, I really hope we get to see Creepypasta Dr. MD again. During the night, I heard quiet noises around the house. Oh my god, so you hear the quiet noises but not your house being demolished, such as knocking and clicking or the occasional creak of a door hinge. At first I dismissed them, but after hearing the sound of distinct footsteps outside my room, I started to become concerned. I got up to see if all the windows in our room were closed, and they were. Marginally bewildered, I went out to see who was walking around the house. Beams of bright yellow light escaped from the edges around the door of Alice's room. "What are you doing up so late, Alice?" "I'm doing a sacrifice to Cthulhu, Daddy." That's not true. A strange metallic smell caught my attention before I even approached the room. "She's been kidnapped by the Statue of Liberty." A horrific sight greeted my eyes as I opened the door, and I instantly recoiled in shock and terror. Alice's face was in an unrecognizable state. Blood covered her head and clothes, and there was blonde hairs everywhere. This is disgusting. I'm not reading this. Blah, 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 blah. In her right hand was a pair of scissors. Blood stained the walls and the circle of carpet around her. Waves of panic struck me like solar flares. This is no time for fancy metaphors, man! For a moment it occurred to me that I could still be asleep, possibly having a nightmare. I slapped myself twice, delivering each strike with great force in a desperate attempt to return to reality. Oh, there goes gravity, and my daughter told me, "Stop fucking around, Daddy, I'm dying here!" However, the scene continued to remain in front of me, disturbing and vivid. When she looked straight at me, I nearly jumped out of my skin, and then I promptly picked my skin up from the floor and put it back on me. Oh my goodness, Alice, I screamed in shock. Did you do this to yourself? Why did you do this? That is the voice of a man whose daughter spilled milk on the floor. This dumbass should be running to get gauze and towels to call 911 or 999. She kept on staring at me, and a terrifying realization dawned upon me. For some reason, she couldn't hear me. I shouted at the top of my voice. "That's the thing that is terrifying? My daughter cut herself up? Meh, she can't hear. Things could not be more terrifying if the devil himself rose from hell." "Why did you do this to yourself? Doesn't it hurt?" Alice inhaled sharply in fear. "Daddy, I wanted to run an insurance scam." That's also not true. "It was like before, Daddy. I felt something was scraping me. It was between my brain and my hair like before, but this time it was inside my arm as well. It's scraping me everywhere. It was between my arm bone and my arm skin, Daddy. You have to help me get it out." I'm not doing this voice anymore. It kind of hurts my throat. Right after she stopped speaking, she felt it return. Her shoulder writhed in discomfort, and she plunged the scissors into her collarbone, trying desperately to separate her flesh from her bones and remove whatever was in between, scraping her. I grabbed her hands and restrained her before she could do any more damage, yelling at her to stop. She resisted my strength, trying as hard as possible to cut herself again. After a while, she shrieked loudly and then gave up, her tiny body limp and convulsing in my arms. I choked on my saliva. I'd never been more terrified in my life. "Daddy, someone's scraping my brain from my bone," echoed. "Oh, I forgot to remind you every couple of paragraphs. Good thing the narrator reminded us again." In my head on repeat, like the screaming of a fire engine siren. "That should be on the way, because you should have called emergency services." I looked at the wound she had inflicted upon her arm. Suddenly I noticed several tiny strands no longer than 3 millimeters long, each slithering and slipping in the blood. I squinted, questioning my eyesight, then reflexively recoiled in disgust as a larger brown strand the size of my pinky emerged from beneath the open wound in her elbow. This made Alice shriek in pain, and she clenched her fist tight. The thing had a dark brown back and a lighter cream-colored belly, like a slug. It advanced by dragging itself forward, using its tiny pincers to cling onto skin in front of it. Its body was composed of tiny rings, which expanded and contracted as it moved, creating compressions and rarefactions like a slinky. They came in various sizes. Some crawled under the skin, whilst others buried back into the flesh. Lifting my head, I noticed that from her head wound, fatter, longer things now came squirming out of the dark red patches in large numbers. Oh, fuck, they actually did it. They actually made it a parasitic creature. It itches, Daddy. It hurts. Get them out. Get them out. Jen had gotten up, and before she could ask what was going on, I told her to call a goddamn ambulance. Because I couldn't do it before because I'm incompetent. Alice was quickly anesthetized. I can't pronounce that word because I'm a moron. She got anesthesia at the hospital. Full body scans showed nothing. Therefore, the surgeons began an internal investigation. Now, I'm imagining this story where the surgeons get into this magical submarine, shrink themselves down, and go on a fantastic voyage through this girl's body to find the source of these, mutated creatures. 2 hours later, they reported that the cause of the thing's presence might have been the result of ingesting food contaminated with eggs. As the things hatched as tiny maggots and multiplied inside the lining of her stomach, they made their way to the brain where they ate large amounts of it and buried deep, thus causing the unexplainable pain 3 weeks ago. But it stopped quickly because the maggots had significantly weakened the sense receptors in the brain, making Alice almost immune to pain, and with this, her sight, smell, hearing, and the general performance of her sense organs also deteriorated. Then they multiplied further and infested other parts of her body, eating away at her flesh. Hey, this all actually makes sense, and they tied it together pretty well. How and when did Alice ingest those eggs? At school? Perhaps it was our fault, but surely we, as responsible parents, would check before feeding her something which seemed dodgy or contaminated. This deeply terrifying mystery hammers an iron stake of fear into the center of my heart. Wow, that's the purplest prose I've ever seen in my life. And I love that the writer does the good old-fashioned, this is the really scary part that so many creepypasta writers succumb to. Don't tell me what the really scary part is. Let it sink in later, fridge horror. The possibility that we did this to our own child is unbearable to think about. Moreover, it causes me great consternation that the species of vile, ominous creatures which has left us in the dark screaming for answers is yet still unknown. Testing is currently being carried out. What if they weren't something mankind has ever been exposed to before? What if they were aliens? What if they formed a symbiotic suit on her? Alice is undergoing surgery. We're told the extent of damage to her brain is severe. Jen and I are both shattered, weeping with trepidation, wishing we'd done something earlier. Josh is silently staring at the floor, wide-eyed in horror, perhaps wondering whether he'd had a lucky escape himself from something lurking in our home cooking, besides our shitty tuna casserole. Also, fuck you, Josh. People still don't care about you. As of now, there seems to be little hope left, but we are still holding on, still praying that by some miracle our baby will return from the operating theater alive. A link is in the description, as always, to that story. So before I look at the comments on the story, I'm going to guess that it came from No Sleep Reddit, because this just feels both beyond the standards of the Creepypasta Wiki and in the style of the stories off No Sleep. Now I'm going to see what the comments have to say. Halal bin Shahar, whom I believe was a character in Lord of the Rings, says, performs exorcism on laptop. Very, very insightful. Bloody Spaghetti says, the brain has no pain receptors, and from what you've described, she should have been at least passed out when the narrator found her due to loss of blood. Well, actually, fuck you. I know I've nitpicked the story, but I'm actually going to give thoughts on it here in a second. I really despise how the Creepypasta Wiki lacks any way to give actual feedback and criticism instead of performing exorcisms. That's enough of the comments for me. Now I'll give my final thoughts. I'll do the negative first, since there's actually a staggeringly small amount of it this time. I think we could have left out the excruciating details about this little 6-year-old girl harming herself. Maybe just say Alice was all bloody from stabbing herself with the scissors. That would have still conveyed the exact same content without leaving a bad taste in the reader's mouth. As it stands now, Alice harming herself merely exists for shock value, and I don't like it. And maybe this isn't the author of the story's fault. Maybe this is him falling into the trap that so many creepypasta writers seem to fall into, that gore makes your story scary. And I think it's just an established genre convention now of creepypastas. But you don't need to go into this excruciating detail about people getting harmed, especially children getting harmed, to make your story scary. If your story is scary on its own, then it doesn't need that gore to be scary. All it is shock value, as I said. And I'm specifically right now thinking of the story Unbranded Laptop, where a little girl saws her head in half. And that's the punchline. That's the lamb part of the story. That's the scary part. And it's not scary. It's just shocking. It makes you not want to read the story more. And so the author does that in this story with her cutting herself up. And I skipped over the main parts of that, but I don't think that's scary. It's shocking. And the author wrote a good story, and he didn't need that here. It hurt the story, in my opinion. And I also found the protagonist a little slow, and the story reiterates the whole my skull is scraping thing a lot. It's not that long a read. Honestly, won't forget it. I just found that a little frustrating. But these are all little nitpicks. The protagonist's not the brightest, but there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. It's just a little funny in places, and I nitpick a little more than I should because I just want to make this entertaining. Now, I loved the twist. As I stated beforehand, I really wanted something like this to happen. I did manage to predict it, though, but I also predicted four other things, so I can't really fault the story there. I wasn't a fan of the parasite being undiscovered. The writer could have just bullshitted the actual capabilities of Tarantula Hawk instead for the whole this is actually real fear factor. But as it stands, the twist was creepy. I love how it pulled everything together, the scraping, the cutting, the loss of senses. This is very clearly an example of a story where the writer actually outlined it all beforehand instead of sitting down and whacking out a piece of garbage. Honestly, this creepypasta made me a little uneasy, even with my belittling of it. Like, I just find that something scary that you could accidentally end up with these parasites in your body, and I think the story pulled that off to a fairly exceptional degree, and it made it kind of realistic. Like I said, tarantula hawks will do that. Of course, there's tapeworms and other parasites, and that's realistic. And I don't think he needed to make something up. He could have gone with something realistic and exaggerated it. Plus, this is the first story I've read where I can't think of any major change the author should have made. I can't make this better for him. It works. I'd rate this a 9 out of 10, and I might say this is one of the best creepypastas I've read. Damn, I didn't think I'd find something like this today. Congrats to Rinscuro13. You did well in writing this. You did well in writing this. Okay, so I'm scrolled down to the bottom of the page, and Creepypasta Wiki is suggesting things to me. I could read The Rake, which I actually want to tackle again after I get a video up about my arch nemesis Bob. I could also read Skinwalkers, which may or may not be related to the story of my pilot episode. I don't know, I haven't read it. Oh, wow. The wiki says I may be interested in, and I swear I'm not lying, six-legged rape centaur. Guess I found our next story. That's been the Creepypasta Read and Review. I've been the Space General. Now excuse me, I must perform